Hello and welcome back. Today we will be continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to be doing something that I was actually a little bit afraid to put on YouTube. You see, it's a little bit dark, it's very inappropriate, and if you have any children present, please escort them out of the room, hide them, put them in cupboards, put them in a loud car to go somewhere else, anywhere else but here, because this is not age appropriate. Hopefully my channel doesn't get taken down, because today we are going to be talking about the spreadsheet. So what we are going to be doing today is we are going to be doing a dedicated tutorial talking about this device that we use in analysis for a lot of other different videos, and talking about why we are using it, how we are using it, what all these various categories mean, and then kind of in the back half of this we will be talking about changes that we have made, including starting to think about wage multipliers, which is going to be, I think, important moving forward into 1.7, as well as changes that were made to individual PMs, such as rice or grain in its entirety was nerfed, and so we will be getting into that. But first, we will kind of be discussing the basics and why we are thinking of information in this way. So while there are some other uses for the spreadsheet, the primary one is for evaluating PMs or production methods, and determining which one is best, because buildings, when you are using PMs, and depending on which PM you're using, are going to generate value. The value that the building generates is going to be equal to the output goods, that's the quantity of goods multiplied by their current price in the market, minus the input goods, that is, the input goods quantities multiplied by their current price in the market, or locally in the case of electricity, and from this we will generate that much value. Value is created in one of two ways in this by buildings, and that is through the weekly balance and also through the wages. And so we can see here this building is generating roughly 75k worth of value. For the spreadsheet, the way we are going to be looking at things is we have kind of the very baseline of evaluation is we are taking a look at things from their inputs, their outputs, and their net value added, and then we are filtering this through a lens of things that we consider to be important. For the input, this is equal to the goods, the quantity of goods that are being put into the building multiplied by their base price, and we use base price for everything in evaluation with the understanding that if a production method is better, we will want to overbuild it, and so that means we will want to target kind of lower prices in terms of what our market should look like, and if the PM is worse, we should actually have higher prices because we should be less inclined to build the thing. But moving forward, we can kind of scroll over to the side and see the guts of where the calculation is occurring, where we have all of the base prices for everything and the quantities that are inputted by each of these PMs, and from that we can get the input, and the same thing is done for output. For net value added, this is equal to the output minus the input, and that is relatively straightforward, and so we can know what the net value of every building on every single production method is, just in terms of evaluating it based on base prices and goods that are involved. Okay, so we can see what has the biggest net value added, and if we were to take a look at all the things, we would actually see that some of the biggest net value added is actually in manufacturing, but it's not the case that you just want to indiscriminately pursue having the biggest net value added, because like any strategy game, you have a finite amount of resources, you have a scarcity of resources, and the two main ones that anyone will consult kind of when using the spreadsheet is going to be thinking about things in terms of construction, and as you kind of de-peasant your pops, thinking about things in terms of how efficient they are per worker. And so just to kind of give an example of how we are thinking of value being produced in terms of efficiency per week of construction, when we have a lumber camp, and it is on the sawmills PM, we will have a net value added of 1,000. This is of course worse than an iron mine, which has on condensing engine pump a net value of 1,350. However, we can build 2 sawmills for every single iron mine that we build, which means that in general we will prefer to build sawmills, and so in general we would prefer to be building more and more lumber mills, such that our price on lumber, both hardwood and softwood, is actually lower than the price price of iron in the market. And when we kind of hit this point, we will know that we have built a sufficiently large amount of lumber because the PM is going to be better. Another way to look at it is we are producing 1,000 net value every time we construct this building without kind of going into it. And I actually forgot to update everything to do with the subsistence farm, so now I think it's actually going to be under 100 in terms of the net value added. But let's just say the subsistence farm gives 100 net value for the workers that are working there. It of course doesn't cost any construction. So when we build a lumber camp and all the people who are working in the subsistence farm instead switch to the sawmills, we've effectively produced 900 in value. And technically it's a little bit more because peasants will have more buy orders that reach the market once they get depeasanted. They will consume, now as of 1.7, 20 times the amount of goods in terms of buy orders reaching the market. They always consume the same amount of goods, but they consume fake goods with their crypto bro currency. And so we produce 900 value when this happens. We would produce 1250 value if we built, an iron mine instead, but if we build two of these, we will produce 1800 value. And so what efficiency per week of construction is concerned about is, this efficiency as you might be able to understand, per week of construction. And so this is what we are filtering for. We are dividing the net value added by the total construction cost in order to determine this efficiency per week of construction. And this is going to be really, really valuable when you have a lot of peasants. And to be fair, we have some tools in 1.7 that makes getting a lot more pops easier, such that you actually might be mostly just focused on this the entire game. However, if you start running out of pops, now the problem isn't the efficiency per week of construction. If you have no peasants, right, then you cannot take someone out from the subsistence farm, right, and send them to the lumber camp because there is no one in the subsistence farm to do. And so what you end up doing and what you end up caring about is efficiency per 100 workers, and you actually sort of recomp your economy. And we could see that those sawmills are only giving 20 efficiency per 100 workers. So we're taking the net value added and we're dividing it by the amount of laborers. And so this is not as good as condensing engine pump anymore. And so what we would want to use our construction on at this point is we would build more iron mines, and then people would be moving out from working in the sawmills, getting 1,000 net value added for 500 laborers, and instead they'd move to the condensing engine pump, getting 1,350 net value added for 5,000 laborers. And so we would be gaining 350 value there, right, instead of gaining 900 value like we did when we built from the subsistence farm, moving on over to the lumber camp. And so this is how we're producing values, and these are, generally speaking, the two scarce resources we are going to really care about most, and what we're going to refer to most often when we're talking about PMs and which ones are better. Next up, we have something to consider or think about, and to be honest, I haven't updated these ones for the upcoming 1.7 change, and it's perhaps something less important to evaluate every single different PM on because it's going to correspond extremely tightly with the net value added, but that is going to be efficiency for the investment pool contribution. Especially important in the early game is going to be this, and the reason why is that for any sort of production of money, you generally want to take as much money from the rich as possible, which is why you consumption tax specifically the goods that are being consumed by the rich, and you, even if it doesn't yield as much money, you prefer kind of the lower rung taxes because of how there is diminishing returns on wealth to SOL, and so generally this will allow you to extract more wealth without depressing SOL as much. And so you could think of investment pool contribution as a form of tax on the rich, and this is one of the reasons that you prefer capitalists. And the main thing that these cells highlight here is that when you look at the ownership of the buildings, agrarian buildings will tend not to give very much capitalist contribution or investment pool contribution, and non-agrarian buildings will tend to contribute a lot more. Now this is of course changed in 1.7, where agrarian or aristocrats can buy specifically resource buildings but not manufactories, and capitalists can buy agrarian buildings. And so there's this is maybe a little bit outdated in terms of the way of thinking about something, but just being aware of this or seeing this kind of initially is kind of I think an important thing for just realizing that capitalist, ownership is going to be superior in a lot of ways because it's going to be giving a lot more contribution. I think the math on some of this also might not have been correct because the ownership is like proportional to the number of workers, not necessarily the exact split, but we'll kind of put that on the back burner for now. Next up, we have price flexibility. Generally speaking, the way that this value is calculated is by taking the output goods and dividing them by the input goods. Generally speaking, if something has a really high price flexibility, it can move in price a lot, specifically can reach a really low price while still being profitable enough to employ up. Generally speaking, resource industries will tend to have a high price flexibility, and so the price will be able to stretch pretty far before it becomes unprofitable. And industrial goods, especially the prototypical or best example of this being steel, have really low efficiency, which is why you can never really collapse steel prices. And if you try and bring steel prices really low, you're probably going to be overbuilding it because it doesn't have a lot of flexibility. If you increase, if we take a look at, let's say, this steel, right, where we have the value added of 1,500, we have the input of 4,500 and the output of 6K. If we decreased the price of steel by negative 25%, the net value added would actually just be straight up zero, and the building wouldn't even be able to employ up at all, right? And so this is one of the reasons why it's really difficult to collapse these prices, and why on the agricultural stuff, where there are very few input goods, especially for all the plantation stuff, you see sky high efficiency, which is why these prices can collapse. And so being aware of this price flexibility is important, and it's a good indicator of also stuff that's going to be negatively affected by MAPI more. It tends to be the stuff that's less flexible on the price. We also have a couple of cells that feed into the same one, try to keep them color coordinated. Construction per 1,000 labor, or the amount of construction required to employ up 1,000 people. This will get higher and higher as you use. Is this working correctly? This is supposed to be the total construction cost per labor, but it seems to be inverted. I'm not sure exactly. Okay, no, yeah, it is. It's the amount of construction required to employ 1,000 people, and you see, as you are using more and more labor-saving PMs, it's going to require more and more construction to employ up 1,000 people because you're not employing them anymore. We have by-demand efficiency, which is, how many, I think this is per construction is the way we're looking at it. We're dividing by the number of construction or the number of weeks of construction, kind of on the base PM. But this is how many buy orders are created in your market, in terms of if you wanted to look at something from the perspective of is it really stimulating the economy, and we'll see that the industrial goods tend to produce a lot of buy orders, and generally speaking, having a lot of construction will increase prices of everything overall, and it is better to have, having a lot of manufacturers will increase price of everything overall because it tends to have a higher demand efficiency, and this is something that's preferable but a little bit abstract, and we can show it kind of on the lumber mills really quick, just this basic idea that if we increase the outputs and the inputs by an arbitrary number, let's say 50%, so we make this 300 and we make this 1800, we will increase the net by 50% as well. And so you would prefer to have generally high prices in your economy to generally low prices, although middling or equilibrium prices would be a little bit better than either one. And we do have separate kind of cells for resources, or separate sections for resources: agriculture, industrial goods, consumers, non-exportables. In these, there you will notice there's a lot of color coordinating and there's a lot of highlighting. Anything that's highlighting, I'm trying to draw attention to. So, for example, chainsaws is an absolutely terrible PM. It's a labor-saving PM that actually makes the building less efficient per worker. There's basically no reason you should turn it on, and it is highlighted in red. A lot of stuff that has been highlighted recently is highlighted in red. A lot of stuff that's been highlighted before is kind of highlighted in its corresponding color, and this just means I'm trying to draw attention attention to something in particular, whether something is extremely high or extremely low for that category. So for example, rice farms only costing 200 construction despite employing up 10,000 pops and basically being a doubled wheat farm or something like this, although a little bit worse than that now, is something to draw your attention to, and you will see this kind of throughout the spreadsheet. And then these cells I haven't updated in a while. I'm not sure if they're broken or not, but the main idea here is it is showing the change from the previous PM to the next one. I think with a lot of the sub PMs and the labor saving stuff, I may have kind of broken these from working the way that they did before, but the main idea here was seeing how much big of an upgrade you were getting with a new technology. I don't think that this is necessarily a super good way of looking at it now, so I'm probably not going to update this section, but that is what this section was indeed about. If I make a dedicated video on construction, I will make this a little bit more updated, but we do have a construction tab, which is looking at the total cost, per construction, was the main idea. We used a wage multiplier now that is considerably lower than what the wage multiplier would be, but we had several different wage multipliers here, depending on how late in the game we were, that were put in 1.4. Average wage multiplier tends to be higher now as the result of a variety of factors. That's too much to get into. But you can see the overall trajectory that is kind of normal to look at in terms of how much construction costs, which is that wooden frame buildings are way, way worse than iron frame buildings. Iron frame buildings are a little bit worse, a still sizable amount worse than steel frame, and arc welding is is barely better than steel frame buildings, and is still better. The main advantage being kind of a MAPI one, where you are getting to produce more construction in the place you want to construct specifically, as well as getting more of an efficiency modifier, construction efficiency modifier, maybe where you tend to be building more. These are mainly the value of arc welded buildings, but the biggest jump is really from wooden buildings to iron frame buildings, which is one of the reasons why, even if we can't produce any iron, not to build any loud cars outside, even if we can't produce any iron, it's a general heuristic because it's so much more efficient. You should just import the iron and use iron frame construction. You go from 2 construction to 5 construction. That's a huge come up. We also have throughput in here that is assumed because of various technologies which give throughput. We have this labor saving spreadsheet, which I'm not 100% is accurate in every way. The updates that we did make were to the grain, which we'll talk about I think kind of in a little bit, which are disgustingly efficient now. And you can see, look at this, logging camps, chainsaws. For those of you who have never heard me complain about chainsaws, I complain about them all the time. But the chainsaws PM is the cost per 100 labor saved is absolutely insane. But we see, a few cells in here to just kind of evaluate it. And if these PMs get updated, if any of them, you see them being wrong, I don't think they've gotten updated. So these things should be right, but I'm not 100% sure because checking everything manually does take a while. But you can get an idea for which PMs are going to be a little bit more efficient and this sort of thing. We have this MAPI example sheet, which is to illustrate what the changes are in price under various conditions. So if we have a market price of a good at 0%, and we have a local glut, that is, we have over double the sell orders than the buy orders, and we can see at what level of MAPI what the price will be and what the percent change in that price is. And so, for example, if we have 60 MAPI, which is the really bad condition, with a glut, you'll have minus 30%. And it is important to note that this minus 10%, plus 10%, this has a bigger impact than it looks on the profitability of the building and how much value the buildings are being created, especially in the stuff with low price flexibility. And so a really good example of this is if we come in here and we had minus 30% and plus 30% price, this would straight up not be able to employ. In fact, if we had minus 30% price alone on the output, we would not be able to employ. And so if we were having to ship in the iron and the coal, and so we were getting plus 30% price on that, and then we were shipping out the steel and not consuming any locally, so we would be getting a minus 30% price on that. Per this, you would be able to see that that would be a really big problem. Even 10% on 85% MAPI, which is kind of a reasonable MAPI once you get some of the initial text, this minus 10% plus 10%, if we come back and we look at the steel mills and we were to minus 10%, and I know it says 11, but 10% is easier to do on the math, and do 5,400 in terms of we are selling more than twice the amount of goods in the place, and so the local price is going to be trending towards minus 75, and at the same time we are consuming more than double what is being produced here, and so the local price on this will be considerably higher. We will see that there is considerably higher, not lower. We will see that profitability or the net value of the building is absolutely gutted. And so this is why you want to build steel where you have iron and coal already, specifically more heavy towards the iron. And because if we scroll over and we take a look at the input goods required, it's mostly iron and just a little bit of coal. And also coal has a lower base price. So the iron's the really important one for having, you want the steel to be on the iron, and this is also why you want steel frame buildings, specifically in states where you have iron, and to a lesser extent coal, but coal is like really not, most of the value is in the iron, or most of the cost is in the iron, and so if you take a look at some of the MAPI things, and you take a look at what the MAPI should be, and also what the market price might be, so we might have an iron price that's plus 40%, in which case having a shortage of that is actually going to produce less of a negative effect for us. There's only going to be a 5% change instead of a 10% change, so if iron's expensive, it's not as bad to be sourcing it from elsewhere in the market. But you can use this to kind of see how the PM should change, and then you can create a copy of this spreadsheet if you want to manipulate any of the values specifically to give you an idea of what's going on. And so that's the MAPI sort of section here. Okay, so the Equilibrium 1 tab is probably the most complicated one. The idea is relatively complicated, and so you don't necessarily need to take a look at it, but recall when we were initially kind of introducing this stuff, we were saying that, hey, all of these are multiplied by base price, and also what something is looking better at in terms of efficiency per week of construction or efficiency per 100 workers. What this means for you is you will want to overbuild it or build more of it such that the price actually depresses more. And so because sawmills are so good in the early game, you would actually want to build more lumber camps until the price of wood is low in order to ensure that you are building the most profitable building. Now, there is a theoretical price of both wood and of iron such that the net efficiency per week of construction for both of these would be exactly identical, because if we increase the price of wood by increasing the output value by 50%, for example, if wood is plus 50% price, we see that the efficiency per week of construction goes from 100 to 160. If we decreased it, it would go down. There's a theoretical price at which you are what's called indifferent to which one you build, because they will produce the exact same value per construction. What this Equilibrium tab does is it explores this. Now, to be fair, I've actually done quite a bit of work in this tab and not yet kind of published some of the ideas where we're looking at things from the perspective of how good companies are and how good throughput is, but just taking a look at this one to kind of situate the idea is we have this tab here where we are looking at an equilibrium, where we have an equilibrium efficiency where all of these things are basically producing the exact same value, but they are producing the same value at different price levels. So in this theoretical economy we have here, the iron is at minus 5%, the wood is at minus 34%, because this is an equilibrium based on construction costs, where we're dividing the equilibrium net right here. You can see this is the equilibrium net. We're dividing this by the construction cost such that our equilibrium efficiency will all be equal on all of these. And so We have minus 5% for iron, minus 34% for wood, 2% for coal, 12% for tools, and also 46% for steel. So steel is extremely expensive. If we were to manipulate any one of these prices, it would also change the equilibrium for other stuff as well. So if we were to change this from 44.8 to 60, for example, it's not just moving the equilibrium efficiency of tools, it's also changing the equilibrium efficiency of all the other PMs that use tools, because the tools are going into it. And so in order to get all of these to be exactly the same, there are several equilibriums, all where the price of these would be roughly higher and roughly lower, but this is showing the relationship between these prices, and also the idea that at this certain economy, in this theoretical sense, when there's only 5 goods that exist, and this is what we're doing, we actually, at these prices, would not care which building we built. And so I think that this is mainly useful for kind of reinforcing the idea that when a PM is looking good for whatever it is that you're caring about, whether it's efficiency per week of construction or efficiency per 100 workers, that means that you would prefer to see a lower price on the good. And so kind of just taking a very brief look, because we don't want to get too deep in the weeds, we can also look at the per 100 workers one, which is going to be wildly different in terms of the equilibrium efficiency. Now that we're caring about per 100 workers, you notice a sharp deviation from the prices that we had in the per week of construction build, where now it's minus 5%. Okay, the iron's the same, and the coal will also be roughly the same. Recall, these are both the 400 construction cost buildings, but wood has gone from minus 34 to now plus 25, and steel has gone from plus 46 to now only plus 15%, and steel tools have gone from 12 to 0% price difference. And so this is also kind of a good illustration of how your economy will shift if you start caring about something else, and if you start running out of labor, if what you are doing is starting to shift from building sawmills to get rid of peasants to building condensing engine pump to get rid of people working at sawmills, you are going to change what actually looks good. And so I think that this also kind of shows that what you are currently caring about will change what's going on considerably. Okay, you may have noticed the spreadsheet change in the past 2 seconds, and that's because we added some stuff in terms of how we want to abstract this information. But the thing we're wanting to start to look at now, or I'm starting to put into the spreadsheet now, which took quite a long time, which is why we haven't had a tutorial video for a little bit, is that we want to think of things in terms of wages now too. And so in here we have all the wages and the wage multiplier. We have everyone with a wage multiplier of 1, 1.5, 2, 3, and 4. And just to kind of clarify what this means is every single profession has a wage multiplier, and when someone gets paid a wage at any building, it will always be multiplied by this multiplier, and it will, in the case of government buildings, be multiplied by the normal wage, which is a bit higher in 1.7 now. And so if you look at any building at all, and it has laborers and machinists, the machinists in that building will always be getting paid 50% more because they have a wage multiplier of 1.5, and also the laborers have a multiplier of 1. The reason that this is so important is if we jump back into game real quick and we take a look at the building, remember that a building is producing value in one of two ways. It's producing it from the weekly balance, but it is also producing it in wages. And so the total value that's being created by this building is roughly 180K. We fiddled with the PM a little bit, which is why it employed down from the previous example. But if we are foreign investing in another country, we only receive the weekly balance. We do not receive the value created by the wages, which is value inside their economy, which, to be fair, if their economy is inside of our market, it will still stimulate our economy, and we would need to evaluate stuff not just in terms of our GDP, because our GDP is not increased by the output of their buildings. That increases their GDP, but the main idea is that we are investing with a particular care for balance. and wanting specifically to avoid or not caring about as much the amount that is getting put into wages, and especially more so if that country is not in our market. If it's in our market, those wages will still stimulate buy orders for consumer goods in our economy. And so that's kind of where these new orange cells have come from, and this new idea of evaluating stuff in terms of wage. Now, we will have wage multiplier, and also there are some political considerations to take into account when looking at these things, and the political considerations are, we didn't fully separate it by every single profession, but specifically machinists, which are in the 1.5 wage multiplier, and engineers, which are in the 3 wage multiplier, these tend to contribute a lot of clout to the trade unions, which is generally kind of the hardest guys to bring up. And so if you are kind of looking at this from the perspective of politics, you do want to keep an eye on the side, an eye on the 3 cell and the 1.5 cell, just keeping in mind that you are also, for a 3 wage multiplier, going to be seeing clergymen. But let's come back into kind of where we are taking it with these totals, because we are dividing these totals by a couple of things. In the case of net wage, or net per 1,000 wage multiplier. So per 1,000 total wage multiplier, we are dividing the net by that. And to be honest, this isn't the best abstraction, because generally speaking, this is, you could kind of think of this as an abstraction of an efficiency per 100 workers, is how much efficiency are we making, not per worker itself, but per wage we are going to have to put out. And we haven't highlighted any trends in here, but you will notice that generally speaking, it will be the stuff that has the higher efficiency per 100 workers, with the additional caveat that it will also be a little bit better on buildings that are like manufactories or industrial goods, because these tend to have slightly higher wage multipliers on average. And so if we take a look at the net per wage multi, it will be considerably higher. However, generally speaking, you're not caring about efficiency per 100 worker when you're investing in foreign countries, because generally speaking they have a lot of available peasants and a lot of available workers. So we've also taken care to make this cell, which is the one I kind of added in the interim, where we are looking at the net of this. We are looking at this number. We are looking at the net per wage multiplier per construction. And so it is going to be this row, specifically divided by the number of weeks of construction, is how we are getting this. So it's going to be, in the case of sawmills, for example, since these have 10 weeks of construction, it's going to be 10% of the value, but for a condensing engine pump, it's going to be 5% of the value, because these are 20 weeks of construction. And so we can also take a look at it from the perspective of net per wage per construction, and I think that this is going to be a pretty good way of informing ideas of what it is we should build in foreign countries, which I think just kind of looking at things and feeling things and feeling things, feeling our way through things, and just like kind of looking at the math of it, is I think that you just want to be really, really aggressive with constructing buildings that have low construction, and you should think about it from an efficiency per week of construction basis, but you also want to keep in mind that the wage multiplier matters, but as a kind of addendum to this, if something has a really, really low score here in net per wage multi, then this is almost certainly going to be something that you want to build locally or at home, if at all. And so you will see, could we find a good example? I'm not sure of a good example just off the top of my head, but I'm guessing that building steel in foreign countries, even though it is going to have a decent net in foreign countries, I think is going to be a bad idea, because steel tends to have a really high wage multiplier. The thing with the absolute highest wage multiplier, if I recall correctly, is the motor industries. And so even though this is a high net per 1,000 wage, you have to keep in mind it's an 800 cost building, and it starts to look not very good for foreign investment. So you build resources and agricultural goods, I think, more in other countries, and then you look to import it as a matter of practice, and then if you are running out of labor, you care about efficiency per 100 workers locally. Although, generally speaking, steel and motors not very efficient per week of construction on their own anyways. So this is another thing to consider or think through. But we are probably going to do more with these orange cells. But this is kind of the new big addition that took quite a while to add, because we did have to look through every single PM in the game and put it in by hand, because I'm actually not very good at creating spreadsheets and I can't just have a program pull it for me, which is probably what I should do. People have very nicely offered. I probably should respond to them and actually ask for their help, but I haven't. And so this is kind of the new addition we have to the overall spreadsheet. Alright, so now let's talk about specific changes to PMs or additions of PMs that occurred in 1.7. So first up, chainsaws was not somehow buffed, which is absolutely incredible, because this PM has long been the very worst PM in the game. It shouldn't even be in the game. It's the uberest of noob traps. It's a labor-saving PM that makes you less efficient per worker, and it uses oil, so that didn't get changed. But other than that, resources, as far as I can tell, haven't gotten changed, except for one thing that is kind of across the board, which is that the amount of labor in all of the buildings, except for the very first tier, for the capitalist-owned buildings, you see the introduction of more shopkeepers, and I think more farmers for the agrarian-owned buildings. It was previously the case that the amount of labor, excluding ownership, this amount of labor is all excluding ownership class, which is now in the financial districts. Excluding labor, it used to be the case that this would employ 4,500, excluding ownership, this would employ 4,500, and this would employ 4,500, but 500 of that, or 500 additional on top of that, would be the ownership shopkeeper. Now, these have the shopkeepers aren't the owners unless it's locally owned, and introduced into the capitalist-owned ones that were previously capitalist-owned is an extra 500 labor, and you see this just across the board with everything that is capitalist-oriented, and I think there was a similar increase with the number of farmers, or I'm not 100% sure, so it might just be a slight nerf to capitalist-owned buildings, but this is the main substantive thing that we kind of see across the board, and we do, other than that, do not see major changes to the resource tab. Coming into the agricultural tab, we see a very, very huge change in all of the farming. Now, we have kind of highlighted in orange things that have gotten changed, and to be fair, we need to take another look at the subsistence ones, because I actually do think it's under 106 and 205 here, but because I think they nerfed more than just grain, but we see a huge nerf in grain. Generally speaking, the PMs, the efficiency per week of construction, way down on all of these, because what has been done is fertilizer inputs have gone down slightly, but other than that, grain output has gone down by roughly 40%, and so the net of these used to be kind of somewhat similar at the later levels to the 130, 150, or I think it used to be around 130. Maybe it was around, I think it was less than 150, but I think it used to be around 130 in terms of efficiency per week of construction, and now on the highest levels it's around 110. Maybe it was around 150. But the point is these have gotten hard nerfed. And so there's way less output. And so you should expect to see grain prices be considerably higher than they were in 1.6. But on the flip side of this, the labor-saving PMs, Harvesting Tools was nerfed. Harvesting Tools was one of the best labor-saving PMs. Now it's really not so great anymore. It used to be the only one, I think, under 10, and now it's 16, so Harvesting Tools is now not very good. But coming back in, all the other PMs are disgustingly efficient for labor saving, and now we actually see that the farms in particular are going to be actually really good on a per worker basis in terms of efficiency. And so I think that these will actually be something, farms are probably a really good example of something that you want to build at home. They're very efficient per worker. They will locally decrease the price of grain, from a MAPI consideration, and pull up SOL in a pretty good way. And they don't work that well for foreign investment, because you're not getting a lot of net per per construction on these anymore, despite them being a 200 cost building. I mean, I guess you're getting a little bit, maybe you play it that way, but also the chem fertilizer tech is a little bit later, and for foreign investment, this is probably something you consider quite highly, because their tech level informs what PMs they could use. And so something like everyone will have access to sawmills, but if you're waiting on someone to have access to like an electricity PM to use something, then it's going to make it like a lot worse. But you're going to get condensing engine pump really early in the game, but you won't get diesel pump until really, really late on most foreign countries, if at all. And so that's another consideration, is that chem fertilizers generally comes pretty late. And so relying on the AI to have chem fertilizers is going to be a little bit rough, because a lot of the people you want to invest in won't be able to do it. So that was the main nerf. Also, potatoes used to have the same output level as apple orchards, and so you used to produce potatoes in terms of you used to produce the potatoes always, because having liquor be cheap was a little bit better, and so now potatoes are a little bit worse, which probably makes them worse. But with the wine meta thing, where wine is over-informing buy and sell orders, or sorry, the sell orders of wine are over-informing buy orders as a result of wine being weird. We might make a video about it, but it's getting changed in like a week. Because of this, I think potatoes is now probably a really bad PM, and the best farms are now a tie between rye farms, if I recall correctly, and millet farms, with rice effectively being pretty hard nerfed, considering the early PMs of the grain are not very good anymore, and the later ones, okay, I mean, rice is like okay-ish, but the thing is you don't get access to, you only get access to threshing machine, and so you never get access to the really, really efficient per worker kind of thing that you're looking at, and so, okay. These were kind of the main changes. We still have to input a change that was just made today for cotton plantations, where they no longer take clergy, which used to be the case, which we haven't put that in yet. Cotton plantations are also better than they look, because you get the throughput from cotton gin, which is not put in here, and so that's just kind of, I guess, something to keep in mind when you're looking at cotton gin. We do have a note on it. We have a note on a few things, but other than that, I don't think there was any significant change. The ownership on, I mean, when we took a look at it, the ownership on this was a little bit surprising. So this is something that we pointed out, was synthetic plants employ a ton of engineers, just an absolute ton of engineers. Nothing comes anywhere remotely close, which is one of the reasons why these buildings are generally not profitable. But if you have in the capital, your capital gets extra clout for workers. If you have in your capital a manufacturing edict and you build synthetic plants there, those might be able to be profitable, in which case you could try and empower the trade unions by building synthetic plants. This is maybe a little bit of a reach. It's probably going to be something we try. It's probably going to be pretty marginal, but if you're building textiles in your capital capital also doesn't have dyes, especially if your capital has sulfur, this is maybe a little bit of a look, but I thought something that was at least interesting to point out. Also, we noticed when inputting a lot of these PMs, technically doubling up on some of these PMs actually reduces the amount of labor below zero. So for example, we see fence plus fridge will reduce the number of laborers to 50. Almost all labor-saving PMs specifically reduce laborers and not other types of workers. And then fence plus rail fridge overcomes more than just the remaining 50 workers, and so it's actually not going to be as efficient as fence plus fridge. And so I imagine you actually want to use barbed wire plus the rail fridge in terms of your final PM. That was the case before, but we just didn't notice it before because we hadn't fiddled with some of the stuff, and we also had input improperly the amount of workers that would really be working there, because you can't reduce the number of workers below zero, as far as I know. I mean, we're going to double check at some point in game, and so we weren't reducing this to a much lower number, but instead to only to 2750. So I thought that was interesting to note. Generally speaking, we didn't see any changes. We didn't see a buff for automobiles. I still think automobiles is bad. A lot of people still disagree with me, but okay. It's terrible. We also see here, it's one of the, in the motor industries, is one of the very only few labor-saving PMs, in the case of water tube, if we highlight that, where it decreases the number of, not just, laborers, but also machinists. I think that's machinists. Yeah, engineers is 3, machinists is 1.5. There's a couple other professions that give a 1.5 wage multiplier coming in here. Clerks also do, and servicemen, but you can generally infer which of the thing is going to be on the 1.5. And so that was a little bit interesting. We also saw that, or this is something worth noting, the boom booms do have lowered labor costs. We saw the same kind of strangeness with artillery, where assembly line is actually just useless and bad because it doesn't actually reduce the number of laborers because there's already 0 laborers. And we saw the same for the munitions plants. So that is a little bit interesting. Again, that's something that was in-game before. We just didn't notice it. And so, okay. I do think that they did change a few things. So just wanted to note here, first of all, mech workshops. I'm not sure if this was the case before, but it does employ up an additional 500 workers. But also, these are going to increase shopkeepers further. For a lot of the luxuries, they add additional labor, which is why they're less efficient per worker, for example, on the second level of the luxury. That is something that I think has been in the game before. Also, arts academies. The PMs were changed on arts academies. We could probably show this a little bit better in game, but the PMs were changed on arts academies in kind of an amusing way because ownership was divorced from the arts academy. So now the PM choice you have on arts academy is how many academics do you want to have here in terms of the patronage, because that's the only thing this changes is you will fire workers to put in more academics. This of course makes the building less profitable, so you should probably, if you're looking for profit, in which case why are you building these buildings, you would want traditional patronage. And if you're looking for clout of the Intelligentsia guys, I forget the name of them right now, academics, if you're looking for the clout that you're getting from these guys, then you would want to go independent artists. I thought this was a little bit interesting. This did change in terms of the PM quite a bit. And again, all of these PMs have more shopkeepers as well, so that is worth keeping in mind, but we're not updating every single one of these shopkeeper ones. But the consumer buildings will have 1,500 shopkeepers. So if you wanted to do a petite bourgeoisie paradise, it would actually make sense to slot in, furniture and textile companies, because of all the changes, and then overbuild these things where the companies specifically are going to reduce the equilibrium price so you can build more and more of them. It's interesting, but okay. We see the introduction of a new PM in efficient canning, which has roughly, if I recall correctly, 10% more output than just patent stills. This is, you get this off the food principle group. 10% out, bigger net is actually pretty nice. I think it also employs 200 less workers. Or we input something wrong. One of the two here, we probably input something wrong. If it employs 200 less workers. Also, one of the reasons why the groceries PMs just aren't very good is because they add a ton of workers. If you don't care about them adding workers, or the flip side, if you want, you would actually prefer foreign people buy grocery places from you, I think, because they have a really high total wage multiplier. And I think they buy on the basis of productivity, not on the basis, or actually I don't know what basis they buy on, but they do have a high total wage multiplier, which I guess you can't see, but when I scroll down you can see it. So we do see the introduction of the efficient canning PM, and also the addition for transportation principle, giving the joint electric, joint steam, and joint diesel trains, which, okay, the trains just generally have not very good PMs. They're not very efficient per worker. They're not very efficient per construction, but these are a really big step up, I think. So we see the joint being around 20% more efficient at all levels, pretty much, except for this final level. This final level is quite a bit more than 20%, I think. It's close to a third, but I don't really know if it's... They have a decent net per oil, so if we scroll to the right a little bit, they have a decent marginal net per oil, like an amount that exceeds actually... There's more net per oil than you get on plastics, which is kind of one of the better oil PMs, and so that's a little bit intriguing, and it might be worth using. It's kind of weird to think that it's worth using. I mean, if you have Baku, which now has 240 oil, and maybe there's just enough oil to put these on, maybe these joint diesel trains are really good One of the problems is by the time you get diesel trains, you've already built an enormous amount of railroads, and then it's just super overkill the quantity you have. And also the transportation doesn't go anywhere, and so sometimes you have local things that are just a little bit scuffed. And it might be the case that you want to use some diesel trains, but not all diesel trains. But we do see, it's a 20% jump or a 25% jump from electric to joint electric. But this is a really big jump. And so I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of, the efficiency. They're also giving way more infrastructure. And so I thought that after looking at these PMs, I do think transportation is a little bit better than I thought it was before. But I still think it's probably not spectacular. If not because these PMs aren't good enough, because the PMs are quite a bit better here, but because if you already have an amount of upgrading these PMs is just so awkward, because then you just have way more infrastructure than you want, and then you collapse the price of the transportation, and so often it doesn't feel good when you initially do it. It would if you could simultaneously downsize them and upgrade them, this would feel so much better. But I did think that one was a little bit interesting. I don't think that there were any other substantive changes to PMs as far as I can remember. There might have been a few changes to which guys are working in specific places. Specifically, capitalists and aristocrats were pulled out of every building and were replaced by other workers, generally speaking. I think that everything is just pretty universally like 5K labor. There were a couple things we wanted to draw attention to, like butchering tools as plus 250 that we thought were interesting when we were inputting all the labor amounts. But overall, I think that we've kind of gone through the changes we saw in PMs, which is the very, very substantive grain change. So now the meta on grain is quite a bit different, which is one of the reasons why you're getting more radicalism, but it's mainly the grain change and the introduction of new PMs, more so than anything else. Alright, that's it. The coast is clear. You can unhide your children, you can pull them out from the cupboards. How many children and how many cupboards you have, that's a topic for another spreadsheet, but for now, the world is a little bit more safe for children. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. The spreadsheet will be linked, or should be linked down below. No guarantees that it will be linked down below, but it certainly should be. Also, if you wanted to support the spreadsheet, I also do have the Patreon link down below as well. It does take forever to update, but we use it for a ton of videos, so it's it does its own thing. It's sentient. It has a mind of its own, which is clearly why we need to hide the children from it. Hide the children from it. Hide it from the children. That's right. Hide it from the children, not hide the children from it. Well, I guess we need to do both. Yeah, that's true.